please subscribe to the channel. Your subscription helps us share more stories like this with the world.
The house was a monument to silence. Located in a pristine suburb of Austin, Texas, its white walls and immense windows reflected a cloudless sky, but allowed no warmth to seep inside. I stood there, amidst minimalist designer furniture that cost more than my entire year's retirement pension, feeling a chill that didn't come from the central air conditioning. Every object, from the Italian leather sofa to the smart fridge that beeped discreetly, seemed to scream that I didn't belong. The opulence was a constant reminder of my status. I was not a guest, but a functional, invisible cog in the machinery of my son Felipe's life. My immediate universe was the marble kitchen and the small, grassy backyard where the two golden retrievers, Apollo and Zeus, ran in circles. They were my only company, two gentle creatures who offered me more genuine affection than the master of the house. I fed them a gourmet kibble that smelled of smoked salmon, while my own lunch consisted of leftover roasted chicken, left behind with the instruction to not let it go to waste. The contrast was an open wound. My son's dogs ate better than his own mother, the woman who had abdicated her dreams so he could build his. I looked at myself in the dark reflection of the turned-off television screen, a stooped, 72-year-old woman, wearing a worn-out cardigan and sweatpants that had seen better days. My shoulders were heavy not just with age, but with the burden of a lifetime of unacknowledged sacrifices. My hands, once steady enough to teach hundreds of children to read and write, now trembled slightly as I held my plate. The wrinkles on my face were not just marks of time, but deep furrows carved by indifference and the disappointment of being treated as a nuisance by the one who was, once, the center of my world. The loneliness was palpable, a fifth occupant in that empty house. The only sound was the click of the dog's nails on the polished hardwood floor and the constant hum of electronic devices on standby. I imagined my son, Felipe, his wife and my daughter-in-law, and her mother, his mother-in-law, on some sunny beach, laughing, drinking colorful cocktails. They would post pictures on social media, the perfect family on their perfect vacation, while I, the forgotten matriarch, refilled the dog's water bowl and made sure the porch lights turned on at the scheduled time. It was in this setting of stillness and resignation that the phone rang, its shrill tone shattering the silence like a stone thrown at a window. My heart for an instant leaped with a foolish old hope. Maybe he was calling to see if I was okay, to ask if I needed anything. I held the device with a trembling hand, sliding my finger across the screen to answer. "Hello?" My voice came out weak, almost a whisper, a voice long accustomed to not being heard. "Mom?" Felipe's voice on the other end held no warmth, only a cold, irritated urgency. The background noise was of a bustling restaurant, with music and loud conversations. "Mom, what happened with the cards? We went to pay for the hotel and the restaurant bill and they were all declined. We can't pay for anything." The question wasn't a question, it was an accusation. He didn't want to know about me. He wanted to know about his credit limit, his convenience, his social status threatened by a financial embarrassment. In that exact moment, something inside me broke, not loudly, but like a thin layer of ice finally giving way under unbearable pressure. All the small humiliations, the leftovers in the fridge, the rushed calls, the loneliness in that cold house, the trip from which I was excluded, it all accumulated and condensed into a single, painful epiphany. He didn't see me as his mother. He saw me as a resource, a facility, a financial safety net whose name he could use to fund a life I could never dream of having. The humiliation, which had been a constant fog around me, suddenly dissipated, giving way to a cutting clarity. A strength I hadn't felt in decades began to rise up my spine, straightening my shoulders. My hand, which had trembled before, now held the phone with surprising firmness. The fear of loneliness, the maternal instinct to protect and solve his problems, all of it was silenced by a new and powerful sensation: self-respect. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to apologize, to scramble to find a solution for him. A glacial calm washed over me, the calm of someone who has reached a point of no return and realizes the only way forward is ahead, away from everything that hurt her. I took a deep breath, the air filling my lungs with a new determination. The restaurant noise on the other end of the line seemed distant, a sound from a world I no longer belonged to. My voice, when it finally came out, was different. It wasn't the faltering whisper from before. It was firm, clear, and devoid of any emotion other than an unshakable certainty. A voice I didn't even fully recognize myself. The voice of a woman who was, in that very instant, reclaiming her own life. I was no longer speaking to my small, helpless son. I was speaking to the 45-year-old man he had become, the man who had used and discarded me. "I don't know, my son," I replied, and the silence that followed on the line was proof of the impact of my words. "Perhaps you should have worried about that before you went on a trip and left me here to take care of your dogs." I let the sentence hang in the air for a second, savoring its weight. Then, I delivered the sentence that would seal my future and his, the phrase that would set me free. "I canceled all the cards that were in my name, including your supplementary ones. After all, the debts always came to me." The decision was made. A new Lucia was born in that instant. And if you were moved by this beginning, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment from which city you are following this journey of rediscovery. The shock on the other end of the line was so palpable I could almost feel it vibrate through the phone. There was no immediate response, just a silence heavy with disbelief and contained fury. I imagined the scene. Felipe in the expensive restaurant, the phone pressed to his ear, his face paling under the questioning gaze of his wife and mother-in-law. The house of cards he had built, using my name as its foundation, was collapsing in public. I didn't wait for his reaction. With the same calm with which I had spoken my words, I ended the call. I placed the phone on the marble countertop with a soft, definitive click. I looked around at that immense, cold kitchen, and for the first time, it didn't intimidate me. The power that place, that those people had over me, had evaporated the moment I chose myself. A feeling of lightness, almost euphoria, washed over me. I was scared, yes, but beneath the fear was an unshakable layer of freedom. After hanging up the phone, a deep silence settled in. But this time, it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't hollow and oppressive, but dense and full of possibilities. I walked slowly through the living room, my bare feet feeling the cold of the wood. I touched the surface of a glass coffee table, an object I always cleaned in fear of leaving a fingerprint. Now, I saw it for what it was, a cold piece of furniture in a cold house. The power these objects and this place held over me had vanished. I was no longer a fearful intruder. I was the architect of my own and imminent future. An impulse guided me to the kitchen. I opened the white lacquered cabinets, past the jars of organic grains and imported teas my daughter-in-law bought. I found an old metal box where I kept my own chamomile tea, the simplest and cheapest kind. For the first time in months, I made myself a cup of tea, without rushing, without the feeling of stealing a moment. The warm steam on my face was like a caress, a small act of self-care that felt monumental. As the water boiled, the first wave of panic tried to wash over me. What have I done? But it was quickly replaced by a serene certainty. I did what had to be done. My mind traveled back in time to a small 2-bedroom apartment in a working-class neighborhood, more than 40 years ago. I was a young, energetic teacher, and Felipe was my small universe. I remember coming home exhausted after a full day of teaching and another night of proofreading for a local newspaper, all so he could attend a private school, so he could have the fashionable sneakers all the other kids had, so he would never feel the lack of anything money could buy, especially the lack of a father who never cared. The smell of chalk and the feel of lined paper were the soundtrack of my life. I sacrificed my night's sleep to grade papers and plan lessons, and every extra penny was saved in a brown envelope labeled Felipe's Future. I saw the sparkle in his eyes with every school achievement, every trophy from a swimming championship, and I believed with all my soul that every sacrifice was a brick in the construction of a brilliant life for him. I didn't mind wearing the same dress for years, as long as he had the best books. The image of him on his university graduation day was etched in my memory. Him, in his cap and gown, smiling, the first in our family to have a college degree. I cried silently in the audience, a cry of pride and exhaustion. That day, I thought, mission accomplished. It was worth it. Little did I know that, for him, that degree was not the result of my love and sacrifice, but the first step on a ladder he would climb alone, leaving me behind at the starting point, like scaffolding that is no longer needed after the work is done. The change was subtle at first. It started when he met his wife, an ambitious woman with eyes that calculated the value of everything and everyone. Sunday visits became bi-weekly, then monthly. The calls dwindled. The word "mom" began to be said with a distant formality, almost like a title, not a call of affection. I became an appointment in his busy schedule, an item to be checked off between a business meeting and a round of golf with his father-in-law. I remember the first Christmas I spent alone. The excuse was a last-minute ski trip with her family. You understand, don't you, Mom? Clara's mother insisted so much. I understood. I understood that there was a new matriarch in his life, one who offered social connections and a status that a retired teacher could never provide. The photo they posted, all smiling in front of a fireplace in a luxurious chalet, was a stab to my heart. I was in the picture, but as the invisible photographer of their happiness. Then came the request that sealed my financial servitude. We were at a cafe, and he explained with the eloquence of a good salesman how he needed a credit card with a higher limit for an investment opportunity. With your name, Mom, your clean retiree record, the bank will approve it in a heartbeat. It's just a formality. I'll pay for everything, of course. I, blinded by the desire to still be useful, to still have a role in his life, agreed. I signed the papers without reading the fine print. The first bill he forgot to pay arrived like a warning. I called, he apologized, said he was busy, and made the transfer. The next month, the story repeated itself. Soon, the delays became the norm. I started using my modest pension to cover the interest, then the minimum payment, and finally, the extravagant purchases that appeared on the bill. Dinners at restaurants I only knew by name, designer clothes, a new generation of gadgets. Every payment I made was a piece of my dignity that was gone. I saved at the supermarket, bought the fruits and vegetables on sale, postponed buying a new pair of glasses, all to keep the name clean. My name. The name he used to finance his life of appearances. The irony was cruel. I lived in poverty to support his wealth, a wealth that excluded and humiliated me. The situation worsened when they moved into this house. I was invited to spend some time, which in practice meant becoming the unpaid caretaker of the dogs and the house whenever they traveled. And they traveled a lot, especially with her mother, a haughty woman they showered with gifts and attention. I saw the luxury shopping bags she received, heard about the plans for trips to Europe they made for her, while for me, there were instructions about the dog food and the alarm password. The last trip, this one to the beach, was the final straw. I found out not from them, but from a post by my daughter-in-law on social media, with the caption, "Family vacation with the best mom and mother-in-law in the world." The phrase echoed in my head for days. I wasn't even an option. I was a hindrance, the piece that didn't fit into the portrait of the perfect family they wanted to sell to the world. And yet, my name was there with them, in Felipe's pocket, in the form of a piece of plastic that would pay for that exclusion. Now, in the silent kitchen, the final battle was taking place within me. The mother, conditioned by a life of self-denial, screamed in panic. "He's your son! He's in trouble! Humiliated! Far from home! You can't do this!" It was a powerful voice, forged in sleepless nights and endless worries. A voice that accused me of being cruel, selfish, unnatural. The weight of guilt threatened to crush me, to make me pick up the phone and reverse everything. But then, another voice rose. A voice that had been dormant for a long time, weak but persistent. The voice of Lucia the teacher, of the independent woman I once was. "He is a 45-year-old man," she whispered. "He put you in this situation. You are 72 years old with a pension that barely covers your medication. Who is really in danger here?" This voice was not cruel. It was just. It did not speak of revenge, but of survival. The struggle was brief, but intense. It was maternal. Instinct against the instinct for survival. And for the first time in my life, the instinct for survival won. The guilt did not disappear, but it settled in a corner, watching as determination took center stage. I was saving myself, and the feeling was not one of selfishness, but of a deep and overdue justice. I knew they would be back. The public humiliation would be a powerful fuel for their fury. The interrupted trip, the unpaid bills, the tarnished status. They would come after me, not with regret, but with accusations and anger. I could visualize the scene, the door flying open violently, the three of them staring at me with contempt, demanding that I fix the mess I had created. The fear was there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it didn't paralyze me. On the contrary, it gave me purpose. I went to my room, the small guest room at the back of the house, and took out a small carry-on suitcase, the same one I used for short trips in my youth. I opened the closet, ignoring the few clothes I had there, and took out a shoebox hidden in the back. Inside the box was my life, not in the form of photos or memories, but in receipts. Years and years of paid credit card bills, bank statements showing the transfers from my retirement account to his, the receipts for the payments I made to get him out of debt. I had saved everything methodically, not out of resentment, but out of a premonition that one day I would need proof. That day had come. I put the box inside the suitcase, along with a book I loved and an old photo of my parents. They were the only items I wanted to take from that house. They were not valuable things, but they were mine, imbued with my history, my true identity. I wasn't running away. I was preparing for the final battle, a battle for my dignity. With the suitcase packed by the bedroom door, I returned to the kitchen. I sat at the table, the now cold cup of tea between my hands. I didn't know exactly what the future held. The prospect of starting over at 72 was daunting. Loneliness was a real and terrifying possibility. But one thing was certain. The loneliness I chose would be 1,000 times better than the loneliness imposed on me in that luxurious house. The wait began. Every car that passed on the street made my heart race. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I was waiting for the confrontation that would set me free. I rehearsed in my mind the words I would say, not a rehearsed speech, but the truths that had been stuck in my throat. For so long, the tension grew with each minute, but it was a productive tension. It was the calm before the storm, the stillness of a warrior before entering the arena. I was no longer the fragile, invisible victim. I was Lucia, a teacher, a woman, a survivor, and I was about to teach the most important lesson of my life, and the most difficult one of Felipe's. I looked out the window and saw the sun begin to set, painting the Austin sky in shades of orange and purple. It was a beautiful sight, and I watched it with an attention I hadn't dedicated to anything in a long time. It was as if I were seeing the colors of the world for the first time. In that moment, I knew that, regardless of what happened when that door opened, I had already won. I had chosen myself, and that was the only victory that mattered. The sound of a car screeching to a halt in the driveway was the harbinger of the storm. The doors slammed with a restrained fury, followed by the sound of a key being forced into the lock. The front door burst open with a bang, revealing the three figures I had been expecting. Felipe was in front, his face red and swollen with rage, his knuckles white from clenching the steering wheel. At his side, his wife Clara, her arms crossed over her chest, her chin held high in a mask of contempt. And behind them, like a judgmental shadow, her mother, whose sour expression of superiority completed the picture of my humiliation. "What the hell do you think you've done?" Felipe's voice echoed through the silent room, not as a question, but as the beginning of an execution. He took a step forward, invading my personal space, the expensive scent of his cologne mixed with a sour smell of stress. Do you have any idea the humiliation we went through? Rejected in front of an entire restaurant. We had to borrow money from my mother-in-law to pay the bill. My mother-in-law. He spat the words out, each syllable loaded with the venom of his own shame. Before I could answer, Clara advanced, her cold eyes shooting daggers at me. "You ungrateful old woman," she hissed, her voice thin and sharp as a scalpel. "After everything we do for you, living in our house, eating our food, for free, is this how you thank us? By deliberately ruining the first decent vacation we've had in years?" The word ungrateful was designed to hurt, to put me in my rightful place as a charity case. But to my surprise, it bounced off an armor I didn't know I possessed. I remained seated at the kitchen table, my hands resting calmly in my lap. I raised my gaze to meet theirs, not with defiance, but with a calmness that seemed to confuse them more than any shout. My voice, when it came out, was low but clear, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Your house?" I asked softly. "I thought I was here to make sure the dogs didn't destroy your real estate investment while you were away. I thought that was my function." My unexpected response disarmed him for a second. Felipe's fury gave way to a stammering frustration. He ran his hands through his hair, exasperated. "Don't change the subject. This has nothing to do with the dogs. The cards, Mom. We need the cards. There are hotel bills to pay, the return tickets. You need to call the bank right now and fix this mess you created." The order was clear. I was not a person with feelings. I was a customer service center that needed to solve his problem immediately. It was the pressure of his wife's gaze that pushed him over the edge. Clara stared at him, a look that said, "Do something. Be a man." Pressured, Felipe exploded, and the words he shouted were the ones that sealed his fate and my liberation. "You're not going to do anything? You live here as a favor. You owe me this. It's your obligation as a mother. It's the least you can do to pay for everything I give you." The final accusation, of being a useless burden, echoed off the cold white walls of the house. The words, "as a favor," hung in the air, heavy and toxic. They didn't hurt me. On the contrary, they were the trigger I had been waiting for. Slowly, with a dignity that seemed to come from another life, I stood up. My movements were deliberate, calm. I walked past them, who watched me with a mixture of anger and confusion, and walked to my small room at the back. The silence I left behind was more eloquent than any shouted response. They expected tears. Please. I would give them the truth. I returned to the living room in less than a minute. I wasn't carrying a handkerchief to dry my tears, but my small carry-on suitcase. On top of it, the old shoebox. I walked to the glass coffee table, the altar of my daughter-in-law's good taste, and placed the box on it with a soft but definitive thud. The sound was like a gavel, the beginning of a trial. The three of them looked at each other, uncertainty beginning to corrode the edge of their anger. I opened the box carefully. The first thing I took out was a thick stack of credit card bills, held together by a rubber band. "Are you worried about the hotel bills, Felipe?" "Let's talk about bills," I said, my voice firm. I picked up the first bill. This one, for $3,200, was to pay for your home theater system. I paid it in 6 installments. This other one, for $5,000, was from your trip to Aspen with your family. And this one, I picked up a smaller bill, for the luxury watch you gave as a gift to your mother-in-law, all paid for by the retired teacher who lives here as a favor. My transformative monologue had begun, and the words flowed without hesitation. "I owe you absolutely nothing, Felipe. I gave you life. I gave you an education that cost me sleepless nights and the postponement of my own dreams. I gave you all the unconditional love a mother is capable of giving, and you took all of that treasure, and turned it into a burden, into a bank account number." I looked directly into his eyes, and for the first time, he couldn't hold my gaze. "You turned me into a resource, a convenient ATM for your emergencies and a free maid for your vacations. You hid me from your social life as if I were a poor, embarrassing relative while you boasted to the world about being a family man. What family, Felipe? The one you show off or the one you exploit and hide? With a final gesture, I pushed the entire box in his direction, the papers scattering across the glass surface. The debt, my son, is not mine. The debt is yours. It is a debt of character, of gratitude, and of love. And from what I see today, it is a debt you are insolvent to pay. Your moral credit has been declined. I picked up my small suitcase from the floor. Its weight in my hand was the weight of my new freedom. Therefore, from this very moment, I resign. I resign from the position of your financial safety net. I resign from the function of dog sitter. And, with the greatest pain I have ever felt, I resign from the job of being a mother who waits for a phone call from you that isn't to ask for something. The silence that followed was deafening. Felipe was pale, speechless, an expression of shock and perhaps, just perhaps, a glimmer of shame in his eyes. Clara was livid, her jaw clenched in fury as she realized that the secondary source of income had dried up. Even the mother-in-law seemed uncomfortable, as if the light of truth had finally reached her on her pedestal. They were paralyzed, with no script for this scene. Without another word, I turned and walked towards the door. Every step was firm, heavy with meaning. I didn't look back. I knew that if I did, the image of my son crumbling might break my resolve. My hand touched the cold doorknob. This was not an act of abandonment. It was an act of self-preservation. I wasn't leaving my son. I was leaving the prison my love for him had become. Are you liking this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now we continue with the video. As I closed the door of that house behind me, I didn't feel the click of the lock, but the snap of breaking chains. The humid, warm Austin night air had never felt so fresh. For the first time, I was breathing it not as a prisoner in her exercise yard, but as a free woman. There was no plan, no set destination, only the visceral certainty that any direction was the right one, as long as it took me away from that life. The suburban street, with its perfectly lit houses and manicured lawns, seemed like a cardboard set. My real life was beginning in that very instant, with a small suitcase in hand and a heart pounding with a mixture of terror and euphoria. That first night, I drove my old car, which Felipe had never bothered to replace, until I found a modest roadside motel. The room was simple, with a nylon bedspread and the smell of disinfectant. But to me, it was a palace. It was a sanctuary of anonymity. I paid for the night with my own debit card, using money from my pension. That small act, the simple transaction of paying for my own shelter, was monumental. It was the first assertion of my independence, the first purchase made exclusively for my well-being in decades. I slept deeply, a dreamless sleep, for the first time in years. The next morning, with the sun streaming through the window and a cup of weak motel coffee in my hands, clarity came. I couldn't stay in Texas, a state haunted by the memories of my sacrifice and my invisibility. An old memory of a road trip with my parents when I was just a girl surfaced in my mind with surprising sharpness. Santa Fe, New Mexico. I remembered the golden light, the earth-colored adobe houses, the smell of chili and piñon wood in the air. The memory wasn't just nostalgic, it was a calling, a promise of a place where beauty was rustic and art was a part of life, not a decorative item. With new determination, I used the motel's lobby computer. The bureaucracy of my new life began. I researched senior communities in Santa Fe, places where I could have security and companionship. I did the math. My pension, which was once devoured by Felipe's debts, now seemed surprisingly sufficient. I discovered that I could rent a small one-bedroom apartment for about $900 a month, which would leave me with enough money for my expenses and even some small luxuries. The math of freedom was simple and encouraging. To ensure a small emergency fund, I made a difficult but necessary decision. I drove to a pawn shop and sold the thin gold necklace and pearl earrings I inherited from my mother. The amount I received, about $2,000, wasn't much, but it felt like a fortune. With that money in my pocket, I bought a one-way bus ticket to Santa Fe. The bus ride was long, but every mile traveled was therapeutic. Watching the flat Texas landscape slowly transform into the hills and mountains of New Mexico was the perfect metaphor for my own inner journey. Arriving in Santa Fe was like entering another world. The light was different, clearer and more intense. The air was dry and clean. The buildings were not skyscrapers of glass and steel, but organic structures that seemed to sprout from the earth. I felt like a stranger, of course, but for the first time in a long time, being a stranger was exciting. There was a promise of anonymity and new beginnings, a stark contrast to the cold, impersonal modernity of my son's house, where every corner reminded me of my failure to belong. After a few days in a cheap boarding house, I found my place. A small apartment in the La Luz de la Vida community. It was a modest space, with a small living room, a bedroom, a kitchen, and a balcony that overlooked a well-tended garden. As I unpacked my small suitcase, placing my book on the nightstand and the photo of my parents on the bookshelf, I felt a wave of emotion. I was planting my flag on my own ground. Every object I placed was an act of reclaiming my space and my identity. Loneliness, my old companion, tried to knock on the door in the first few days, but it met resistance. A neighbor named Elena, a woman with gray hair and an easy smile, greeted me as I watered a pot of geraniums I had bought. The next day, she invited me to the community breakfast. I went with a shy heart, but I was greeted with a warmth that melted my defenses. People were interested in my story, not my bank statement. I noticed that the community library was a welcoming but little-used space, with books gathering dust on the shelves. It was then that the old teacher within me awakened from her long hibernation. I took a piece of cardboard and in my best handwriting wrote, Lucia's Book Club, Readings, Conversations, and Coffee. Every Wednesday at 3 p.m., the first story is on me. I felt a spark of purpose that I thought had been extinguished forever. At the first meeting, only 3 people showed up. Elena, the gardener, Arthur, a retired history professor with a biting sense of humor, and Sophia, a quiet woman who listened more than she spoke. The conversation started hesitantly, centered on the short story I had chosen, but soon we were talking about our lives, our losses, our forgotten dreams. In that small room, between cups of coffee and the smell of old books, I found a human connection more real than anything I had experienced in the last 20 years. The book club flourished. From 3 members, we grew to 5, then 10. It became the social event of the week in the community. Our discussions were passionate, intelligent, and, above all, full of laughter. I was no longer Felipe's mother, or the lady who takes care of the dogs. I was Lucia, the founder of the club, the woman who brought stories and people together. My name, which was once used to incur debt, was now synonymous with friendship and culture. My transformation was visible. Looking at myself in the mirror, I saw a different woman. My shoulders were straight. The nervous tremor in my hands had disappeared, replaced by the firmness of someone holding a book to read a passage aloud. I smiled more often, a genuine smile that reached my eyes. One day, I went into a shop in downtown Santa Fe and bought a printed dress in bright colors. When I put it on, I didn't see an old woman trying to look young, but a woman celebrating the life she had left. I understood a fundamental truth. Self-love is not selfishness. It is the foundation upon which all other healthy loves are built. Setting boundaries, even with those we love, desperately, is not an act of cruelty, but an act of self-preservation and dignity. I discovered that happiness is not a destination you reach, but a path you build, brick by brick, with courageous choices and small daily acts of joy. Happiness was possible at any age. Now sitting on my small balcony, with a cup of chamomile tea in my hands, I watched the sun set over the Sangre de Cristo mountains, painting the sky with colors that fill my soul. I am no longer alone. I am at peace with myself. I have friends, I have purpose, I have respect. My life did not end on the day I left my son's house. It began again. The future is no longer an abyss of loneliness, but a blank page, And I, Lucia, am the author, eager to write every new word. Have you done a gesture of kindness that changed a life? Leave a little heart if you believe that love is more powerful than any wealth. Subscribe for more stories of second chances. Comment, love is priceless if you also believe in human kindness.